Today we're going to make chicken broth from scratch. The recipe is in the description down below. So these are all the ingredients that you're going to need. First, we'll start off with salt. I have kosher salt here, but you can use table salt, doesn't matter. I also have peppercorns here, probably about a tablespoon's worth, I would say. You can also use the colorful peppercorns or black. I have 1 whole onion here, white or yellow, Vidalia sweet onion, doesn't matter. I've got about 5 carrots here. These are smaller ones. If you have bigger carrots, use like 3. 3 stalks of celery, and then 1 whole chicken, probably around 3 to 5 pounds. Okay, so step 1 is we're going to cut all of our vegetables. I already washed and cleaned all these vegetables ahead of time. So we'll start with the onion. So this here is called the eye of the onion. So we're gonna wanna cut that off. We do not need that. Then what you're going to do is basically just cut your onion into quarters. So we're gonna cut it in half, and then just cut it again, like this. So we've got 4 large chunks of our onion. Next are the carrots. So we're just gonna wanna chop off these ends of the carrots here. Get rid of that. And then what you're gonna do is just cut them into large chunks. Just into large. And you don't need to get a measuring tape out or anything. Just make sure they're all large chunks of somewhat uniform size. So lastly, the celery. Again, we're gonna wanna cut the ends off. Don't want that. Same thing on the other end. And then just like the carrots, we're gonna cut these into large chunks. And then the next thing we're gonna do is move over to our pot of water. Okay, so now we're over to the water. So in our pot, this is a 16-liter pot, which is about 4.2 gallons. I've got 10 liters of water currently in here. You always wanna leave a few inches of space because the chicken and the vegetables are going to obviously make the water rise. If you don't have this big of a pot at home, you can obviously use a smaller pot. Just make sure it still has enough room to obviously fit a whole chicken, and so that there's enough actual broth that's going to be made. So the first thing we're gonna do is actually put the chicken in here. All right. And then the next step, we're gonna add all the vegetables that we just cut into there. And then we got the vegetables and the chicken in there. So the next is our peppercorns. I'm gonna put in. And then lastly is we're gonna add some salt. So for this amount of water, I'm probably gonna add about 3 tablespoons worth. You can always add less. So after a couple hours, once the chicken's actually cooked through and you can start to taste your broth, you can add more salt. You can't do the reverse, so start with less. You can always add more. Okay, now we're ready to get this boiling. So you're gonna wanna turn your gas or electric stove on high. What you don't want is your flames to go around it if you have a gas stove. So this is obviously a very large pot, so I don't have that problem. But if you're using a smaller pot, you don't wanna see the flames come around the outside of it. That's bad, you want them to be inside of it. It's counterproductive. We're gonna put our lid on it to help it boil a little bit faster, and we'll see you back when it boils. Okay, now that our water's boiling, as you can see, this is a rapid boil. So what we're going to want to do now is turn our heat down. So I like to turn my heat down gradually to get to a simmer. So right now I'm gonna cut it about 1/4 of what it was and just kind of sit here for a little bit. And then gradually turn it down. Because if you go from really, really high to all of a sudden low, it's not even gonna keep a simmer. It's just gonna, sometimes it'll just go flat. So I'd like to gradually bring it to a simmer. And it does help having a lid. That will help it as well. If you don't have to have a lid. If you don't have one though, then you really need to make sure that you're turning it down in sections and not just automatically. So this is more along the lines of what we want here, is just these small bubbles on the surface, just a simmer. And we're gonna let that go for about 8 hours. So we'll check back soon. Okay, so now we're gonna taste our broth to see where we're at salt-wise. I definitely need some more salt. I'm gonna add some more. And that's the best part about making your own broth, is that you can completely control your salt content. So if you're on a low salt diet, this is great because broth at the grocery store is loaded with salt. Give that a stir, and then I'm gonna retaste. And keep in mind, I'm doing this many hours after I started, so the chicken is fully cooked. We don't need anybody getting sick. Much better. That's perfect. Okay, so now our 8 hours is up. So what we're gonna do is turn our heat off. And now it's time to start to strain the broth. So the first thing that we're going to do is get as many of the big chunk items out as we can. So what I like to do is start with a bowl lined with what I'm going to discard everything in. And then I also have another bowl off to the side because I'm going to save the chicken. You can shred the chicken, you can use it for soup, you can make whatever you want with it, feed it to your dog, whatever need be. So how we're going to scoop everything out of here, you can either use a hand strainer or tongs to try and scoop as much out as you can. Try and get what we can off the top first. And then the fun part is always getting the chicken out. A lot of times, I would consider you very lucky if you can get the chicken out in one whole piece. A lot of times it's gonna break apart and you're gonna have to take it out in multiple chunks. Mine's already falling apart here too. Let's see. And you basically just keep going and doing all of this until you've gotten at least all of the big chunks out. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start to strain our broth. So you're going to need a fine mesh strainer like this, as well as a spouted bowl like this one. And this is a nice strainer because it's got these kind of hooks on it, so it'll hang on our bowl like this. And then the next thing you're going to want is whatever you're going to be pouring the broth into. So you're having soup tonight like us, you're going to want to put it directly into a pot. And then you can also store in glass containers as well. I don't recommend plastic because this is so hot. If you want to put it in glass or metal or ceramic of any kind and then put it into plastic once it's cooled down, that's totally fine. So now we're gonna pour our broth straight through our mesh strainer. And what this is gonna do is catch anything small that we weren't able to get out before, like the peppercorns or tiny chicken bones, stuff like that. So it didn't catch too much. It'll catch a lot when you get to the very bottom of your broth, where a lot of the stuff sits at the bottom. And then now, where the spout comes in handy, I'm just going to pour it directly in here. Yeah. And then a tip for storage. So if you're going to store them in glass containers like this, what I recommend doing, because a lot of times you're going to finish this up at night, right? Because it takes 8 hours. What you can do is pour it into your glass, and then what you want to do is let it sit as long as you can. So right before you go to bed, close them up, close all your lids up, put them in the refrigerator overnight. And then the next morning, put them in the freezer, because then they should be completely cooled down and you don't have to worry about your glass breaking due to the heat in the freezer. One thing that I wanted to say that you can actually help doctor up your broth recipe for. So this is a very simple one that usually a lot of people have onions and carrots and celery on hand. What you can also add to it is you can take a whole garlic bulb, just cut it in half horizontally, throw it in there, You could also do any fresh herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, anything like that. You could also throw in there because it'll get strained through. You can even put it in a little cheesecloth if you have one with twine around it, and then it all stays in one and you can easily take it out. Thanks for watching, and we've got a lot more content coming in the new year. Liwa! Liwa, come here! Come here! Will you sit? Good girl. Yeah.